just give me a thumbs up if I'm audible. You can hear me.
How do you do that?
Yes.
Perfect. Cool.
Okay,
So
here's one.
perfect. Thanks everyone. Hey guys, thanks for joining this meetup. So this is a meetup group from Munich in Germany, and this is our fourth meetup since we started last year. This is our second virtual one, and we will be having some more in before the end of this year as well. So hi everyone. I can see some more attendees joining, but we'll get started off with it. So welcome to the meetup. So this picture is from the first meetup that we organized before the COVID times, the happy times. So we used to organize in-person meetups, and this was in the Salesforce office in Munich. And we had some attendees. We had a topic of API community manager, and we spent a lot of time, discussing API-led architectures and had some proper networking. But with COVID, we will be having all the meetups and virtual for at least this year, or maybe until we have COVID situation and cannot gather in a particular place. So yes, welcome back. I'll just let you guys go through this for a minute before we kickstart off. Great. Okay. So let's start this off. So before we start, so there are certain disclaimers. So the host, so I'm the host, and there are some speakers who will be speaking at for certain topics at the event. Only the speakers will be able to communicate over audio or video. So everyone, so people you might not have access to audio and video, please do not worry. You still have an opportunity to chat. You can just click on your chat channel at the right side of the tab, and you can see there is a general tab where you can post any general questions. And when we start the Q&A, you can open. I'll be enabling the Q&A tab where you can post your questions. And if you have any specific questions, you can address them with @ and the name of the person who you're addressing this to. Okay. If you have a slow network, please do not be worried. You can just drop out and drop in again. So this meetup will go on for a couple of hours. So you will be allowed to join in again. If you have any questions, I have already posted a link in the general one. If you have troubleshooting, listening to the audio or video, you can look at this link and try to fix it up. Okay. We would urge everyone to turn on the camera, at least the presenters and the speakers and the host for this event, unless you have any bandwidth concerns. Okay. And please be aware that this meeting is being recorded for the benefit of the community. And I'll be sharing the link, a YouTube channel where we'll be posting this meetup and all the contents. And this recording as well. Okay, cool. Now let's go through today's agenda. So we'll have a couple of introductions of the speakers and the hosts. Then we have two specific topics. So we have one where Andreas is going to talk about the integration journeys and different integration project and the lessons that has been learned. Then we have Demir from BP talking about managing runtime fabric and in a hybrid deployment model that they have implemented. Post these two discussions, we'll have 10 minutes of Q&A right after each of those sessions. And after the sessions, we have an interactive quiz event where we'll be it will be a quiz open to everyone attending the meetup. And the first 3 winners get free MuleSoft training vouchers and certifications. Okay. Then we have a a short peek towards the MuleSoft hackathon event that has already been started. I'll just giving you a free some tips and tricks, and I'll be giving you the links to register, and then we wrap up this event. Cool. Now starting with introduction. So I am Chinmay Sahu. I'm based in Germany in Munich. I'm a senior technical consultant with MuleSoft Professional Services in Germany, and I will be your host for this morning. Right. I'll hand it over to Ganesh, who is our co-host.
Yeah, hi. Hey everyone, welcome to the Meetup. So I'm Ganesh Kumar, working as a senior consultant at UTA, and I've been in MuleSoft for working in MuleSoft almost for the last 5 years. So that's it about me, a short introduction. Yeah, let's go with Shakti.
Thanks,
Shakti.
Ganesh. Hi, everyone. So this is Shakti here. So I've been working with MuleSoft for past 5 years as a senior consultant with Cognizant, and welcome you all for the meetup today.
Thanks, Shakti.
Thanks.
So about the speakers, I'll let the speakers give their introductions during their own sessions in a detailed way, but just for a brief one-liner. So Andreas Grimm, he's our most senior architect here in MuleSoft Professional Services here in EMEA, and Demir is a platform engineer, MuleSoft platform engineer at BP. So. Yeah, so I think, guys, we can just kickstart off. If you could, guys, just give me a thumbs up. Great. So I'll stop sharing and let's dive into our first topic, which will be presented by Andreas. And Andreas, I'm stopping the screen share. You can start sharing your screen.
So, yeah, good morning or guten Morgen. Few words in German before I start. Also, wunderschönen guten Morgen. Ich weiß, das ist jetzt für München, aber aufgrund der Teilnehmer werde ich also meine Präsentation in Englisch geben. Wer allerdings Fragen hat, kann die auch gerne in Deutsch an mich stellen. So, just for those who haven't understood this, I'm going to give this presentation in English. But those who actually feel happy to those who actually would like to question in the Q&A channel in German, please feel free to do so. That's sometimes easier for people who are not native speaking. Chinmaya, could you activate the Q&A channel in? Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to have a look at the Q&A channel while I'm presenting. Those questions which make sense to answer during the presentation, I will pick up immediately. Otherwise, I'm going to address them afterwards. So feel free to leave your question in the Q&A channel or your contact details if you want to have on offsite connection. Happy to do that too, or to forward your question to the right person. So before I start, I know that Chinmay did this. I have my own little disclaimer. It's the same one with a little bit more. A lot of the stuff I'm talking here about in my personal experience and opinions. None of the projects I'm talking about are real projects, but abstractions of project I worked on. I'm trying to make this as real life as possible, but I'm also trying to make clear that these are my opinions, and sometimes my opinions are different from anybody else. So who am I? Well, my name is Andreas Grimm. I'm located, or I'm part of MuleSoft Professional Services for the last 5 years. I'm the practice manager for professional services in continental Europe. And I'm sorry to correct Chinmaya, I'm only the second most senior guy in the team. There is one gentleman in the UK who's longer with the organization. I'm doing integration since 1999. And yeah, I'm not only looking that old, I am that old. It actually is nothing I can decline. And you can actually see what 20 years or 30 years in IT does to somebody. I don't have a picture of me leaving or graduating. Well, yeah, I'm aging. So one thing about this one is, as I said, I'm going to present, and a lot of the presentations are my opinions. I'm very happy to, I understand that my opinions might be different from your opinion, and that's great. I think if I do the presentation and nobody is annoyed about, and I have everybody agreeing with me, I definitely do something wrong. So a few of these things should be disagreeable, and that is good so. The main thing about architecture, project management, and design are things which needs to be disagreed on and discussed, because otherwise we are not making any progress. So part of the stuff I say here you might disagree on. I'm happy with that, and I'm absolutely happy with you discussing about it. If I would be in Munich now, I would say let's have a beer afterwards and let's go to the beer garden and talk about it. Sadly, that's not possible, but I'm very happy to get into contact with every and each of you who actually sees things different than I have, and I'm very happy to also to learn from you guys. One word about the presentation. I'm speaking in English. Well, my name actually indicates that I'm talking an awful lot, and I might talk very fast. And if you do not understand what I'm saying, please do me a favor and shout at me. I try to speak slower then. I try my very best at least. But I'm very good in talking, so it might be that you actually want me to slow down. Please tell me so. So why I'm doing this here? Well, basically, I'm going to discuss lessons learned. Basically coming from the situation that many of us were in, winning a new integration project or being the lead of a new integration project, and being exposed to integration projects before. I know project managers who are really concerned about the success of their project. So what I'm trying to do today is to look into cases where we have seen projects running into jeopardy or failing, and where we've done firefighting or architecture reviews addressing why we have things failing. Now, this list is by no means exclusive. They're just the 5 things which came up to my mind when Chinmaya asked me to talk today. So, as I said, something to talk about, something to look into. So put myself into position of an architect or a project manager, and being worried my project might fail. Well, what do? You look at the internet, and what do you see? You see the statistics, and what the statistics say is your project will fail, because the majority of integration projects are failing. It's nothing which we need to worry about. This is, or yes, of course we need to worry about, but there's nothing which is particularly strange. We know that integration projects are failing. Integration projects have been failing for the last 20 years, and a lot of the technical developments and methodology developments we see nowadays are results of failing projects. So what I want to talk about is 5 anti-patterns, 5 scenarios into threats that challenge my project and which I've seen in projects and which needed to be addressed. And yeah, let's talk a bit about this. So your project might fail. Again, don't panic. We have seen projects failing. We have done firefighting for many years to actually work with the people. The worst thing which can happen from a project in jeopardy is that we don't learn. So lessons learned on failing projects out of the Grimm's fairy. No, it's not a fairy tale. It's more the storybook. So I don't want to talk about fairy tales. It's the Grimm storybook. So the first lesson I'm learning is when it came, or I learned personally when it came to integration projects, that working with a project manager, many project managers running projects do not have experience with integration projects, but have run projects before. And they basically like to be on what is the left-hand side. So me and my location where I am, taking my dog for a walk, throwing a ball, beautiful skyline, clear view, and I know exactly where the ball is going to land. I know exactly what the dog is going to do when he runs after the ball. This is no obstacle in the way. Fantastic. Reality is our projects are more like the right side. So yeah, I see maybe the next 20 meters, but what's about then? So can I throw the ball? And what will the dog find when he runs after the ball? And what will I see when I'm running after the dog running the ball? Pretty much the picture of what are we going to see once the ball hit the ground and when I go forwards into the fog. My projects in integration were very often like this. We're starting at a location where we really didn't understand the impact of the integration project. We had a couple of use cases defined. We had a couple of integration cases defined. What we didn't have was a clear view where this would end for different reasons. Some of the reasons I will talk about later. Some of the reasons are based on the fact that many projects are changing during the time and defining scope creep or defining challenges, technical challenges, functional challenges I haven't foreseen before. So wish against reality, ideal against reality. Let's talk about the reality, not about the ideal world, because this is what we are going to get exposed to. Now, talking about managers and peer architects, this is when I start projects, I see a lot of preconception, ideas about why integration projects are leading into issues. The first thing I hear is, yeah, integration is only here because it's a necessary evil. We need to get the data from somewhere, but we are not really having an interest to dive into integration as a major part, which is a problem because integration is way more valuable than just connecting two systems. It's producing results above and possibilities above the actual project. So what we need to do is we need to actually address this with the person who really doesn't want to see integration as more as just a part of the project, and really work with them why integration is misunderstood from their side. The other thing I hear is integration projects are way too technical. As a project manager, I really don't understand all these connectors and protocols and approaches and methodologies, but I want to have an opinion about it. So it is always important then for us to take the focus away from the technology. So I'm really cannot count the number of discussions with project managers in bigger programs where they are having opinions, feelings about details in the integration project that should not really be their focus of interest, right? We are doing an awful lot in our methodology by building APIs, building facades. We're doing an awful lot in our methodology to make sure that for the developer who is consuming an API, the details of the APIs are hidden, are in a black box. We have the facade pattern we're using. We're making sure that the details, technical details, and technical challenges are limited from the view of the other developers. Nevertheless, what we actually see in projects is very often that enterprise-level architects or program architects are concerned about details on the single integration components. They are very concerned about details on connectors, very concerned about the details on the connectivity to the backend systems. So what is important for us is to take the focus away from this technology view and actually explain to them how we can build requirements that describe the API. So basically saying, yes, we understand that this is something that concerns you, but what we should actually focus on, and what we should actually address, is not the detailed technology, how MuleSoft get into the Microsoft system or the Oracle system or the SAP system or the Salesforce system. Well, what we should discuss is what are your requirements on the API side, and make sure that the developers understand these requirements and are able to develop these. If we don't want to use APIs, if we want to use services, it's the same discussion. So if you use a service-oriented architecture, you still can say, I'm not interested how the service is actually implementing the functionality towards the backend system, but what are my SLAs? What are my requirements towards the service? And these service requirements are the ones I actually need to be concerned about. Next one is integration projects interfering with already completed parts of the project, which we usually see when we are starting with our integration project too late. What I mean with that is we're not starting at the moment when the definition of the interfaces are done or the processes are defined so that we understand and can intervene if changes are necessary. What happens is we are getting onto a project where the connecting systems are already completely defined, but there's a communication gap between the source and the destination of the transaction. And the person who finds that out is the integrator, is the middleware. And then the messenger gets shot. So what actually helps is to bring the architects, the integration architects in very early in a project so that we can start identifying these gaps, not at the end of the project lifecycle, but at the beginning of the project lifecycle. As a part of an integration architect, I am a translator between the different systems. Bringing me in too late is basically writing two documents, design documents, and then asking me at the end to actually make them fit. Doesn't work. Next one is, hey, we're starting, when we're doing integration projects, they're coming at the 11th hour. They're coming in late. And what I mean with this is we're getting very often a lot of pressure, and I'm talking later in this presentation about it, that the projects are the one factor that jeopardizes the overall project because we are pushing very hard towards the deadlines. Talking about that one later. And then finally, we're costing so much. Well, what you see on the right is the machine that you pay your parking tickets under the arena of Ajax Amsterdam. And my office at that time was next to it. And I went after a couple to the machine who wanted to pay for their 1 hour parking. I have an expectation of 3 to 5 euros, which is what you currently pay in the Netherlands for an hour in a parking house. Now, what they actually saw was this number. Okay, I understand this is a bug in the system, but of course they were shocked. And I see the same kind of shock sometimes when people go in and they actually start with the integration project at a stage where all the systems are around, scope creep has head in, and we are asked to evaluate the project and actually start working on it based on the previous estimate on undefined or badly defined use cases. We came up with an estimate. After the work, the sum is way higher because the use cases have changed, the number of integration has changed, the number of APIs has changed. You can see the same face on the project managers, like, why is it so expensive? Basically because we are working with estimates at the beginning of the projects, and these estimates are based on the use cases you have at the beginning. And then we are out of the picture for a couple of months. We're coming back in, and we do the same exercise again, and we find that there is way more stuff to work on than we expected before. So things we need to discuss and things that actually generate perceptions towards integration projects. So what I learned out of these experiences that integrations of projects are not just like other projects. So they're way more interactive. I need to take way more effort, and I have to go in way earlier in the integration, in the project, than people expect me to come in. So as an architect, I want to be in an integration project at the inception of the project, not at the end of it. I need to be aware what integration is done, and I need to be aware how the scope is changing over time, so that I can adjust my planning and that I can talk to the other architects about the impact of changes while the project is running. Integration projects are highly volatile. That means they're changing quite a lot during the time, and change management is an important part of an integration project. And that means we are needing to adapt our integration approach to reflect these changes from the other system. And we have to bring in the technologies in the very beginning that help us to react on fast changes. It's not a surprise in many projects that we are bringing in the CI/CD environment, because one thing we want to do is we want to automate the deployment process. Many projects are seeing deployment as a challenge. What we want to do is we want to deploy on a daily basis. We want to deploy maybe even on a half-daily basis at the end of the project, or hourly basis, so that we can adjust to the changes in the project on a very, very rapid pace. The last thing is that integration projects are technical diverse. That means as an architect or program manager for an integration project, I cannot have a team which is big enough to understand all the technologies. You cannot scale to that level, and you shouldn't scale to the level. Well, what you need is you need to have contacts with all the different other architects, with the different program managers, so that you get the skills from their teams and they can help you working with you on the technical challenges your team is experiencing. Yeah. What we came up with, and everybody who has been working with us before or knows Knowledge Hub has seen this picture. It's a Knowledge Hub. It's basically the life cycle we are bringing in a project when we started up. And as you see, we actually, when we implement this model at the very beginning of the project, we have the API stakeholders communicating with an architects, and we have an iterative process in the architecture. That means we are building the integration between the different systems on a very high level in the beginning of the development process. So even if we don't know exact details on what we are going to implement, we're still trying to build an initial integration architecture that helps us to start implementing the very first flows at a very early stage of the process. And we're using an agile iterative process to do so. I'm talking about that one in the next section of the presentation. Second lesson. Let's start the integration project when the connecting systems are ready. Not really a good idea. So this is the most common project model we see. Basically still having phases with requirements design verification. And this is still the approach I would say 90 to 95% of the projects are using. Yes, they are then going in and doing a sprint-based approach in the implementation phase. But the big phases like requirements definition and design verification and, well, actually operational maintenance are starting pretty much as part of their, as part of a flow. The misconception is I get told at this stage, oh, we are doing agile development, we are doing Scrum. Let's be blunt, honest. Yeah, you're not. So where we start is based on the estimates. This is when we normally then are called in to start. So the first sprints are executed at that stage already. The systems have been developed. And definition of ready says, well, all the interfaces are defined. Now you can come build the integration. Integration team goes in. Integration team looks at the definition of the interfaces and finds problems with the definition of the source system, with the definition of the backend systems. The designs haven't been moved together, and suddenly we are throwing the projects back by a couple of iterations because we have to rebuild the designs, we have to rework the interfaces of the systems. So this is when we are bringing us in. Let's be blunt, honest. This is not Scrum, this is not Agile, this is Waterfall. And we should treat it like this and actually treat it as problems with a project as being a Waterfall project. So where's the problem here? The problem here is usually that when we're seeing projects that the timeline for the verification is fixed. So we usually find statements from program management which says, we're going to start acceptance test at a certain time. And we cannot move that timeline without being visible towards the management, being visible to the stakeholders. So the one timeline fixed, either verification or go live, is usually the only fixed deadline you have in your project. Everything else might be flexible. Go live or going into acceptance is fixed. And what happens is, this is reality. The design part of the project is extending. We are spending way more hours in the design. We are spending way more hours in the implementation, and we are slipping. And if you remember the picture where we are coming in, where we are starting with the integration effort, we are suddenly starting not in the middle of the implementation with a good buffer away from the deadline. This is when we are actually starting to do the integration effort. This is when we are starting to work on the integration projects. And you see the problem is our deadlines are extremely fast. We are either moving some of our development effort into overlapping with acceptance testing. So we are making an emergency plan or contingency plan which says, hey, we are going to deliver this part of the integration after the deadline for the QA test, so that they can start with the QA testing of the stuff which is not related with the integration. And you deliver it then afterwards, so we are still can communicate to management, we have made QA testing in time. Reality is we haven't done it. we are late. And if you remember the picture of us being in the last sprint or last 2 sprints or something like that, if we find a problem here, we are going to have a rollback into design. The verification phase is dying, and we are going to get informed that it is our fault, that the integration effort is too slow, and it puts the project into jeopardy. Well, what can I do to actually compensate for this one? Well, as I said before, let's start with the integration project earlier. Let's start with the implementation earlier. In many cases, we are implementing against systems that are either out of the box or that are customized as part of the project effort. Typical examples would be Salesforce, or would be SAP, or similar system where additional functionality is implemented as part of the rollout of the program. So where should I start with the integration effort? Well, here, at the beginning of the implementation phase. That does not necessarily mean I'm implementing the complete integration, but there is so much stuff which needs to be done, which is pushing up towards the end, that already can be done at that stage. So we can build the integrations already at this stage. We can build APIs for all the systems. They are not complete, but we can build them. And if I find any issues at this stage, I can communicate it directly to the design team or to the implementation teams of the other systems, and not causing trouble with these teams. The second thing I can do here is I can concentrate on what we call common functionality, which is normally getting rather shortly implemented if I'm running into time pressure. Things like monitoring, security, logging, all these kind of extra functionality, non-function requirements need to be addressed too. And this is the moment when I can start working on them. When I start working on the non-function requirements early, I'm not surprised at the end that I'm breaking the non-function requirements in the verification space. So there is a lot of work to do, and I can move this. I can actually start very, very early. Feedback I get is, well, I've seen this idea before, but we don't think this is actually working. Well, it wouldn't work if you're not bringing your system up into supporting this approach. Basically saying, okay, we are not ready with the systems that we want to integrate. Well, if we are using APIs and we're using our layered architecture, one thing you can do is you can start building the system layer APIs. Even you don't know what exactly is exposed in the API, but you can build the system layer APIs even at the beginning of the project. What you actually will have is you will not have exactly all the interfaces ready on the receiving systems, but what you can build is you can build the connectivity, and you can build the APIs based on the standard functionality that is available in the backend system. You can build the APIs based on what is available in SAP, or which is available in Salesforce, what is available at that stage at the ERP system you're having. Second problem people do at this stage is that they say, we need to know exactly what data goes from A to B in order to understand how the integration flow needs to be implemented. No, you don't. What you can do is you can actually take the business entity that get exposed from the SAP system, and you can expose the complete entity into the process layer environment. You might not need all the data, but you can ignore the data that comes out of the API in the process layer when you don't need the data. The only information or the only problem you're not having, or the only thing you're not having are the data that is added in the integration. And just answering a question how this is related to the API first approach, this is exactly the API first approach. So what we are doing is we are using the definition of the
Jamai, we lost the audio.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
We
So
have
just give it a
some
minute for
network
him to
issue.
rejoin. Yeah, I'll just give him 1 minute to rejoin.
Yes.
minutes. I hope you can see me again.
Now, yeah, it's.
Yes, we can listen to you. Yeah.
Can you see the screen? Good. Okay, the question is, how was this related to an API first approach? Well, it is pretty much an API first approach, or it is the API first approach. The difference is that a system layer component, when I do the API first approach, I define the API before I implement the interface. Now, if I define the API based on the business entity that the backend system is exposing, the first step I do is I take the exposed data from the backend system, and I'm defining the API that exposed data from the backend system, and then over time adjust the API specification based on the design work of the team. So I'm following strictly the API first approach. I build the API first, and if the backend system is not available, I might even mock the non-existing backend system, right? So what I'm doing is I'm building the APIs based on what the SAP system, what the Salesforce system, what the ERP system is exposing. I'm building the API first. I'm implementing the API at a later stage in the sprint, or I'm in the very first sprints and make the API available. So it is 100% implementation of API first. The misconception is that teams are building APIs purely on the requirements of the project. In a system layer, what you can do is, or what you should do, is you should build the API of the system layer on the data that is available. So when you have let's say a customer object in Salesforce, you potentially are only using a certain subset of that customer information in your integration. What I very often see when I do architecture reviews is that the system layer APIs are then cut to that business requirement. So I take all the data out of the Salesforce system that I don't need in the process layer. That was a great approach when we did service architecture some 10 years ago, and we had to look into network bandwidth. There's no need for this at this stage. So what we can do in the system layer API is we're taking for the complete business entity in the backend system, in the Salesforce system, and we're exposing the complete customer with all the information there is. Does the process layer need it? No. But it can ignore it. Technology allows us to actually say, well, I get the data, but ignore the data. What is the beauty of this approach? Well, let's assume that in 4 sprints you find out that you need some of the extra data of that customer. Well, easy. You just have the data, you just haven't used it. So you don't need to change the system layer API. You can just start using that API more extensively. What happens if in 2 sprints you find out that I need to change the customer business entity in Salesforce to complete the business requirements? Also possible, because what you do is you modify your system layer API in a new version. You generate a new version of that API, and while the process layer is still working on the old version, I can build up the new version, expose it. So the versioning feature of Designer and of Ramo that actually is only seen as an interesting feature for experience layer APIs and public APIs, why not using it in a project and just expose a new version of the system layer API to the process layer if it needs to change? Third one is, if you're exposing the complete business entity in the system layer API, you're increasing your reusability. So the next project that needs a customer business entity from Salesforce, they don't need to build a new API, which is then customized to their flow, because that one main API in Salesforce is, or in the Salesforce system layer API, is so nicely built that I can start reusing it. This is work I can put really early into the development of my project. I can start using automated unit testing. Automated unit testing is something that is normally pushed out in an MVP, or which is normally pushed out in a project because we have no time. Because we have no time, we cannot build MUnit. Because we do not use MUnit, we cannot use automatic unit testing, and we cannot use CI/CD to the fullest. If you start early, you actually build the MUnit test. You do a test first development approach. You have the MUnit test when you deploy the first time into your CI/CD environment. The testing is done automatically. Your test circle is faster. The code quality at the end is faster. So when you start the very beginning building MUnits, even for the small integrations, for the very small ones, and it just grows as you build more functionality and you deploy on a daily basis, you can deploy with minimal unit testing effort. If you're starting light in a process, the first thing you cut is documentation. The second thing you cut is automatic unit testing. And then after you actually deploy, you put half your team in building unit tests again, which is a pain in the neck just to get the unit tests done. Doing that early really helps you to move the whole effort forward and to actually keeps you doing your deadlines. If you do that, you're way more likely to win in the integration race against the deadline.
So Andreas, you have like 12 more minutes before we go for Q&A.
And I'm just on slice number 2. I'm sorry for that. As I said, I can talk for days about things. Okay, let me be a little bit faster. So you haven't seen me screaming about this part of the previous section. We have problems with the business functionality, which we want to put into the integration. Anti-pattern for the last 20 years. Do not put business logic into the integration pattern, into the integration. Because what happens is you are going to be chased not only by the integration functionality, you're going to get chased also by the design changes in the main business functionality. Do not put business logic or extensions in the system layer component. It's not going to work. So I'm sorry for racing. I'm happy to take this offline, but I think that is a clear logic, clear statement, or clear lessons learned. Never ever put business logic into the integration layer. The integration layer is a postman. It transports data from A to B. And this is the only thing we want to do. Is we want to make sure that the information is transmitted between the sender and the receiver. The postman is not working on your text declaration because the tax office is not able to do that. The tax office doesn't go to the post office and says, hey, I have the functionality not in my business process, so you build it in there. That doesn't work. The postman is just taking the envelope and moving it over. Sadly, with the idea of BPM, we actually see that people are starting to move business logic into the integrations layer itself. Please separate your BPM from the integration layer, separate MuleSoft from the business logic when it comes to extending functionality of the backend systems that is not provided. It just causes problems in your project. Fire and forget. Wonderful integration pattern. I see it coming over and over again, and it causes so many problems and so many failures in acceptance testing. And if it doesn't generate failures in acceptance testing, it generates failures in the early life because the systems are running out of sync. So we are actually generating a transaction. We are sending the transaction into the integration layer, and then the system assumes everything's fine. And it goes on, and it works on something else. First thing is what is the bad part about it? First thing is, now the first system thinks, hey, the data has been processed correctly. The backend system rejects the data for whatever reason, technical, functional, I don't care. First, the system thinks it's fine. Backend system says it's not fine. Customer logs into front-end systems. Customer sees everything's fine. Backend system says never received the order. After 4 weeks, we get a call. Why is the order not being processed? Yeah, it's not in the backend system. Integration is faulty. It's not the integration faulty. We are assuming that we are implementing an integration pattern that is not working. The not so bad one is at least I use the return codes from the backend system and move it into a kind of report, which I give to the front end people, say, this is what has failed, please fix it. It is still not optimal because especially when you go in transaction integrity, you actually have to roll back steps in between. It's a lot of manual work, and it actually will cause problems in the running systems. The really bad one is I actually put an operator or a maintainer in the middle who is fixing the transaction in the middleware and resubmits it. And every auditor screams bloody murder. Because what is happening is I'm actually able to transmit functions to the backend system that are not reflected in the front-end system. Auditability is 0. Traceability is 0. And I can promise after about a couple of weeks, you're having an angry customer trying to figure out what is going on. And if you're really running a business that is highly audited, like medical or financial or telco, I can promise you the auditor is taking this thing apart and is going to yell at you pretty high pitches. I actually spoke about that one, so I go to the next one. So what is new is now I'm running into a lot of people who are telling me that when I build an event-driven architecture, I'm basically doing exactly the same thing. I'm building a fire-forget system. So the event generator is producing an event, which is then processed, and it's a fire-and-forget approach. No, it's not. Event-driven architecture has nothing to do with the fire-and-forget part. It's similar, but it is not the same thing. So even if you build an event-driven architecture and you're using a publish-subscribe paradigm, you always should put in a feedback loop to the controller, which is in an event-driven architecture, the source of the event. And let's be honest, if you use event-driven architecture in a user front end, like a web front end, you actually have it, right? You have a feedback feedback function. You have a box which, when you click the OK button in your web screen, says, "We processed your request," right? This is a feedback. The feedback from me as the event source. Why do I not build the same thing I do to the human? Why do I not do that to the backend system? So event-driven architecture does not mean I'm not building a feedback loop, and it does not mean I'm not building an error processing part, which goes back to the originating system. Last one, and I'm sorry, I will exceed my time limit for a few minutes, but that's okay. But this is important to me because this is, in my architecture reviews, the one thing I find most often, and which is really, really bad. So we actually in MuleSoft have a batch approach where you are able to build batch flows. So you can build a batch flow with input, processing, reporting as part of the MuleSoft integration. But what do I see at the end when I look into the batch flows is something like this. This is a typical picture I see, right? I actually have a file which is converted, talks to a Salesforce backend system, and then actually reduces a result. And isn't that the most beautiful point-to-point connection you have ever seen? This is not really doing reusability to you whatsoever. So I actually make the spin because it is so important for me. So there is no end use, there's no reuse and ability to scale. How do you scale this thing up if you actually find that the backend system is too slow? This basically what I see here is, I see here a problem as soon as the backend system, and we have Salesforce that is fast, take a slow running backend system. You cannot scale this up. You cannot really make this batch job run faster because you have no component where you can start screwing. So what would I do as an integration architect? Well, I would actually start building APIs, even for a batch load. So let's take the Salesforce API. I can build a Salesforce API that actually takes the batch load and puts it into Salesforce. The HTTP connectivity from the batch towards the Salesforce API is way faster than the external connectivity. And what is beautiful about this one is, if I find out that for any reasons the Salesforce connectivity is slow, I can scale the system layer API out. I can run multiple system layer APIs. I can put workload balancing in place, right? So rather than to actually talk to the system directly, I put my APIs in place, and guess what? I can use these system layer APIs for other functions, for other load processes. And as I said before, if you're looking into an API and you actually build the API in the way that you expose the full business entity, or you make the full business entity part of your API, you actually can reuse that API in many, many different cases. You generate reusable components, even your build batch processes. So batch processes in this picture, and you see basically where I located in the experience layer, a batch process in this picture is basically a different form of an experience layer. I have a different consumer of the API, which is a batch process. So why not doing it? So I know I've overrun the time. 5 observations of architecture reviews, which we have seen, which we are running into. I hope it helps. I'm now in the Q&A channel. I will answer questions there, so you can go on with the program. I know I've overrun my time allocation, but I'm actually proud I've only done it by 15 minutes.
That's fine, Andreas. So I think we can squeeze the time up. So yeah, so guys, feel free to ask your questions. You can go to the chat channel, and in the Q&A section, you can ask your questions to Andreas. Or some attendees have speaker access. You can also speak about it if you want. So we have the channel open for 5 minutes. It was a great discussion, Andreas. I mean, we can relate to some specific topics like event-driven architecture and the way we handled, the failure situations where it has started off from the source system, doesn't reach the end system. Where has it gone? So yeah.
Yeah, it's event-driven architecture is going to be very important in the IIoT world, and we are seeing more and more customers adopting event-driven architecture. I think we will have to think as architects and implementers. We need to think how we still provide the feedback loop into an event-driven architecture. Just answering on the Q&A channel, we will make the slides available.
Yep.
So Chinmaya will provide a location. He has got access to the slides. We will make them available.
So you'll have access to the recordings as well. So I'll be sharing the location of the recordings and the YouTube channel at the end of this meetup.
About article blog regarding the batch approach, not available yet. It's on my disks. I'm writing it. I need more time to finish it. But we are as soon as I'm done, we are moving it into Knowledge Hub, and you will be able to reach it in Knowledge Hub, or I make it part of the MuleSoft blog space.
We have another question in the general channel, Andreas, from Balagopalakrishnan.
Okay, let me switch over to general. There are very limited, for me, there are very limited reasons not to start thinking APIs when I build an integration. When it really comes to building point-to-point. And this is literally based on timing requirements in on-premise installations. When I'm building an on-premise installation, I have to build near real-time. When I'm building near real-time, then I might be required, due to non-function requirements or timing requirements, to really build a pipeline that is limited point-to-point. But as soon as I'm using business objects, and like in a batch process, very often they are not too time critical, I actually gain more from building APIs than building point-to-point, apart from the fact that the maintenance and keeping point-to-point connections updated, it's a pain in the back when when one of the backend system changes and the point-to-point connection needs to adjust to this one, right? So if you imagine you have one central system, you're building point-to-point connections all around, what you're ending up with is a dependency on the backend system. The backend system is changing, and you suddenly have to build all the other systems new or change it. If you have an API, what you do is, as long as the API structure is only increasing, you're exposing a new API, but you do not have to change the connectivity. So it is a way reduced effort on this level. There are, of course, timing issues, but most batch processes, you gain more by being able to size up the integration, like looking into what is the really slow performing part. You usually, I mean, you guys, when you do performance testing, who of you really found the integration being the main reason for bad performance? Or if you're going deep into your heart and you look into an integration, it is usually a backend system that is causing it, right? It is usually a backend system that has a long-running business process that takes the data and cannot process it in a timely manner. And it's us being blamed because that stupid backend system doesn't process it properly. I've been in so many of these where we actually stop there. It's like integration is slow, but most of the performance in the backend system is the reason why it's slow. It's just the backend system which needs 1.5 seconds to process the incoming customer. We get it through in milliseconds. The backend system needs 1.5 seconds to process it. What do? Is if you can scale out, you can at least run 5 different customers at the same time, right?
Right. Cool. I think we can jump to the next topic in the interest of time. And thanks, Andreas, for this session. Really helpful. And I'll make sure to share all these ideas on this and the slides to everyone who has attended this meetup.
Yeah, Peter, for your question in Q&A, event-driven architecture, we definitely do something about this one. We are going definitely to maybe one of the next meetups talking about event-driven architecture. Good.
Great. Thanks. So, Andreas, you can also, answer the questions in the Q&A. Yeah.
I stay online for a bit. If
Great.
you have questions, I will answer them in Q&A.
Thanks. So
let me stop sharing.
Yes. So I think Demir, you can take the control, and we can start off with the next one, which is managing runtime fabric and the hybrid deployment model that has been implemented at BP. So over to you, Demir.
Thanks, Chinmay. Can you see my screen? Has it come up yet?
Yes, we can see.
PowerPoint, yes? Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, I suppose, to some of you. My name's Demir Akarsu, and I'm a software engineering specialist at BP. So I've been at BP for about 3 years now, primarily working on the MuleSoft platform, and I've been the lead engineer responsible for setting up RTF in BP. So I'm here to talk to you today on adopting and managing MuleSoft's runtime fabric in a matured hybrid deployment model platform. So I'll be showing you how to remove the ambiguity between the deployment offerings. And I hope that you leave today with some inspiration for any innovations that you see here today that you can apply to your own org to enhance your customers' experience and add efficiency to your Center for Enablement teams. Bit of a disclaimer for myself as well. The data that I'll be showing on screen, it's all dummy purposes and it doesn't represent BP information. So on today's agenda, I'll explain a hybrid deployment model in BP's MuleSoft's journey, and likely a lot of other customers as well, how their journey was probably similar, followed by a high-level overview of runtime fabric for those who are not too familiar with the product itself. Then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes of this topic, and I'll shed light into how BP have integrated CI/CD pipelines, developer monitoring and alerting tools, how we automate fabric/infrastructure upgrades and addressing Mule-issued security patches efficiently, and then finally, how to manage product spend/utilization. So all interesting integrations that may not always be too obvious or out of the box at first with the product that do require some innovations. So I'll show you today how BP adopted and evolved user experience and the Center for Enablement governance to mature runtime fabric in an already hybrid deployment model to fit in with our architecture. So moving forward, when an org first adopts MuleSoft, customers do tend, and in our case, use CloudHub as the default deployment option. So it'll not cover too many use cases for your customers. For example, primarily for really routing and handling external traffic only. But that doesn't mean that you can't route to internal systems, although that's a topic for another time. But the ecosystem is fully managed by Mule, is the main takeaway from that. But as your platform matures, and in our case, we wanted to expand the use cases supported for our customers, looking to use MuleSoft. Therefore, naturally, on-prem options are sought out. And in our case, our on-prem platform, it had its drawbacks too, where it was only internal routing. It was a big one for us was that it's managed by another team and that it uses a different control plane to the Anypoint platform. So for developers that come on looking to use Mule and we send them our way for on-prem targets, they quickly find themselves having to learn other technologies that they might not have needed to know. For example, how to use Linux and a bit of basic knowledge on containerization as a whole. So in terms of efficiency, this is not really desirable. Pipelines and platforms, as I mentioned, are governed by other teams, which means that there's the limited flexibility. So we needed an option to remove the complexity that our on-prem offered to allow governance and automation to be managed by us, the Center for Enablement team. So this is when Runtime Fabric comes into the picture, and it offered a lot of solutions that helped us to address those complexities. So I'm just going to briefly talk about Runtime Fabric for those that are unaware for it. It's a containerized service that automates the deployment and orchestration of Mule applications and API gateways. Runtime Fabric runs within customer managed infrastructure such as AWS. In our case, we're using Microsoft Azure. You can also have other virtual machines, bare metal servers, or data centers. So in RTF, it is quite similar to CloudHub, whereas it does leverage most of the Anypoint platform, including the control plane. But there are some responsibilities, shared ownership between MuleSoft and the customer. So MuleSoft, they're responsible for the product itself and all the delivered components, such as the Runtime Fabric appliance, agents, runtime engine, and other dependencies for Mule applications. The customer, however, is responsible for the provisioning, configuring, and managing the infrastructure required for Runtime Fabric, including VM resources, operating systems, load balancing, kernel patching, just to name a few. And that's RTF at quite a high level. But let's now dive into how you can enhance the experience, starting with CI/CD pipeline integration. So on screen, this is the MuleOps pipeline that BP use. Within BP, our Mule applications can be deployed to different platforms via CloudHub or our on-prem platform. But as I mentioned, our on-prem platform is fully managed by another team. So we've built a deploy and release one-click pipeline to support deployment to CloudHub and our Azure RTF to remove the ambiguity between the two platforms and dependencies on other team. The pipelines are intended for the projects to use to deploy the applications to CloudHub and our Runtime Fabric by separating out our build and deploy phases. So one of the added benefits to our customers is that this uses a unified deployment model. So everything goes through this pipeline regardless of the platform that it's deploying to. And as you can see from the image, we do cover a rather large feature set, but one that may stand out to you, I've highlighted it there in yellow, is CPU and memory limit check for Runtime Fabric. So governing resources on Runtime Fabric is not as straightforward as CloudHub, and in order to avoid overconsumption and allocation, we've removed all manual deployment to our platform. So everything has to go through this MuleOps pipeline with a default of we use 0.1 vCores and 500 megabytes of memory, and then anything additional that requires it goes through engagement with the Center for Enablement team, but we have other means of governing and looking into those resources. So the above image is our build pipeline, and then following this, we have a release pipeline consisting of standard 4 stages representing development, testing, staging environments, and all the way through to production instances on the platform. So deployment to the development instance is done automatically through this release pipeline, and users then, we authenticate them in that pipeline to make sure that they have the required profile to deploy. So making sure that they're part of that business group and that they have the required permissions so that we don't get an overabundance of users deploying whatever they want and consuming whatever resources they like. So in order to provide flexibility to the project teams, deployment to the test instances, so they're triggered by the project teams themselves. The latest version is then deployed to the development instance and is default picked up by the pipeline for deployment to subsequent test and production instances. So like I said, those users then get authenticated to make sure that they have the required profile to be able to deploy to those respective instances. Then after the successful testing of the applications, deployment to production is triggered manually by a project team. So we mandate that project teams we use ServiceNow as our ticketing tool, that they have a valid change in place to be able to proceed with their production deployment. And the pipeline validates that ServiceNow change request number that's provided by the user to ensure validity of the ticket is on an approval status and within the implementation time window. So the summary here that I was getting at is that you can really build pipelines as complex as this, but also at the same time remove the minor differences between different deployment targets, so Cloud Hub and RTF. And when we use RTF as well, we don't have it just as one cluster. We have several clusters for several different use cases. And developers may not know that there's even, when they're using these pipelines, that there's any infrastructure difference whatsoever between the two deployment options. So that you should treat really all your automations and pipelines in this manner to remove the ambiguity. We have tools open to our developers that allow them to use Cloud Hub or RTF by just changing a single variable. So for example, we've created proxy automation pipelines. So this lets developers skip the development phase of the project lifecycle and onboard with a proxy customized to their use case, and it's deployed onto RTF or Cloud Hub, whichever one they want to choose, and it'll take care of all that automation and figure out the deployment targets, as well as publishing all the assets such as like to Exchange, API Manager, Design Center, the runtime itself ready for testing. So our MuleOps pipeline creates these assets and it greatly reduces developer time overhead, which is all managed through one pipeline. Now, I wanted to talk about how you can enhance your developers' experience, first of all, your customers, and then how we get into how your C4E can manage efficiency. So bringing on just to some developer monitoring and alerting tools. So let's get into some of the ways that you can deliver these features. So BP, in our journey, we were quite early adopters of Runtime Fabric, and therefore some of the features that's available with the product today, they weren't accessible to us back then. So as time progressed, we rolled out these features as our own platform roadmap. So if you wish to monitor and alert using your own managed infrastructure build offerings, you can manage those features independent of MuleSoft, allowing you to have, again, further control and flexibility to your platform, which is, you could think of it as a similar reason to how we chose to adopt RTF as our on-prem default option, as well as a few other options, but primarily to replace our current on-prem offering. And that gives us the ability and control to provide a 360 view of our API landscape. So there are, like I said, there's a wide variety of tools and methods that can be used to monitor the status of your applications, whether if you're looking for real-time pod and OS level metrics or the application logs itself. So BP, we've already been using the Prometheus, the Grafana dashboards from that, which developers are already accustomed to. So that's an out-of-the-box feature of RTF that we've provide that experience to allow users access to that platform for their real-time of application monitoring fairly seamlessly. But not everyone has that luxury because we have logs coming from different platforms. So in order, like, some of the problems that we have is, so Cloud Hub has some of its restrictions. Our on-prem requires some additional knowledge, like I said, of Linux containerization to try and find the logs, and Runtime Fabric, we're not so keen on giving access because it has infrastructure level insights that we don't necessarily want our customers to have access to. So this can be quite difficult to learn and familiarize yourself with, especially if you're a developer deploying to 2 or more of our platforms. So you don't want to have to go to Cloud Hub, dig out your logs there, or RTF, find them there, and on-prem offering, work through the control plane there in order just to get your logs. So we've decided that in order to remove that ambiguity, that we would have all our logs be in one location. So we've built custom log4j appenders for log forward into Splunk, which is our platform. You can see a diagram of it, or a visualization of one of the dashboards we built that I'll get into in a minute. But Splunk's our platform of choice for all our data storage and visualization. So we've enabled log forward into the Splunk platform using HTTP event collectors. So as part of our onboarding process, we have another application that we use on Salesforce that projects will go to and enter information about their APIs and how much licenses that they require, what type of API is, a bit about the use cases. And once that gets approved, we provision Git repos with template starter kit Mule apps that come out of the box with log forwarding and various other setup taken care of that they then will integrate into the MuleOps pipeline for deployment and release. So we let developers, they're free to use this data in Splunk however they deem fit. So they can use it for visualization purposes or alerting purposes to fit their needs. But this also allows us to push logs to, again, this is our own on-prem managed platform, so we can log internally and build monitoring capabilities on top of that, independent of what MuleSoft are offering. So again, we've taken, similar to Anypoint monitoring, before that really came about, we've taken our monitoring up a level. So we've built, this is an API-led approach that we've published process APIs and encapsulates data from all our platforms to allow project teams to visualize KPIs that might be desirable to consumers or project leads, not necessarily the developers themselves. So yeah, I mentioned there, Splunk's our platform of choice. So we've provided an experience API as our out-of-the-box offering to have this visualization already in place with already custom dashboards that projects are free to use. But the main goal of this was that we built process APIs that can be reused to visualize or even alert in other sources, such as Power BI. You can store your data in data lakes, that we now have that reusability available. So some of the things there that I'm showing on screen is that we actually do show is API resource quota, our response time, average payload response size, so the total number of API calls, who the top consumers are, the top endpoints, inbound/outbound response times by those endpoints, and some basic health information on your API. Yeah, as I mentioned, it's all dummy data, though, the figures that you're seeing. And then we've done a bit of work on our own out-of-the-box offerings for alerting based on all our different platforms. So we have the application and in RTF, that server alerting that goes to mailboxes and our Slack channels using SMTP protocols to alert users of applications, whether they're high consumption or low consumption based on certain thresholds of CPU and memory, or restarts or peaks. So we do this by triggering alerts from data we send to Splunk and using our RTF cluster alerting. So as stated, there's many methods to provide monitoring capabilities that developers get access to as soon as they onboard to the platform. You can build template apps that have all this login and all in place, so projects don't have to configure it themselves, and it's all out of the box to give you that real-time view of your application to platforms, so that they're not having to search in a bunch of different places to provide and provide just single custom dashboards where they can get a holistic view of and valuable KPIs of their applications, the business groups, how they're performing overall, and just how the entire project is doing in general. So these are some of the offerings that we give to our customers that developers might be more interested to, or to enhance their experience. But in the Center for Enablement Teams themselves, there's a lot of other ways that you can drive efficiency, especially if you have maybe smaller teams. So those are all the tools available to give them developers an easy flow and experience when choosing to use MuleSoft. But how can your C4E teams reduce the manual overhaul and drive efficiency? So for those who maintain RTF, like myself, to handle upgrades to the Runtime Fabric product that require hardware or even software changes, they can be quite challenging and time-consuming. So in order to address this, we've automated our infrastructure provisioning and management through the use of some technologies. Like we use Azure DevOps a lot, so we write our code in Shell, Python, MuleSoft APIs, CLI tooling, and PowerShell to effectively manage resources and downtime. So very simple things in your scripts make life so much easier, freeing time up your time to address any upgrades that need to be provisioned quickly. So for those who work on RTF, again, you'll know that maybe creating a cluster can take an entire day of manual work, trying to figure out what are the machine specs, the differences between the controllers, the workers, and the environment details, how it needs to join, to make sure it's got all the correct setup. That can take an entire day. So the automation that we've put in place reduces this time maybe to about 30 minutes, mostly due to sanity checks, and it requires little RTF or even infrastructure knowledge itself. So the screenshot on the right this is a grab from one of my scripts for our RTF creation / updates. So we reuse a lot of the same scripts for joining nodes or creating brand new clusters. And this works out the configuration that server requires if it's a controller or a worker. So just some of the things that you can see there, just easy ones like partition and drives, set and iNotify watches. Some of these things have already been addressed in recent Mule updates, but as early adopters, we were catching these things and having to put them in ourselves. So other little things that help with upgrades is the automating the replica scaling for production pods to ensure rolling deployment when servers require full reboots. So managing RTF software and infrastructure tasks, they can be quite overwhelming to new joiners and really disastrous if not done right. Not to mention KTs do require lots of training because it requires at least basic understanding in the underlying technologies such as Kubernetes or even your cloud provider as well. So in our case, Azure, but other users will have to be familiar with how AWS architecture and infrastructure works. So simple automations can be a very effective way to reduce your hands-on time and others in your team who need to manage the platform. And another thing that we've implemented as well, that when, oh, sorry, too far there, still on the same slide, is along with cluster maintenance and upgrades, security issues get issued by MuleSoft, and it can also be quite time consuming. So I'm sure you've come across those before where they require redeployments of your applications to specific versions in order to address the patch. And given the scale of some orgs like BP, it can be quite time consuming and difficult to manage without the right automation in place. So we've addressed this by building pipelines that, again, Azure DevOps pipelines that allow specific applications chosen by a C4E, so either running a specific major runtime version, so like 3.9.2.3.4, whatever of MuleSoft, to be patched to the latest version. So we wrote this to address that security patch, but it also allows us to ensure that we're all compliant and running on the same base image of MuleSoft in our platform, which was an added benefit that came out of this. And as we have a surplus of data already going to the Splunk platform, we were able to, we forward data to our Splunk platforms, and then we take our inputs to our Azure DevOps pipelines from exporting data that's in our Splunk platform, as that first image there in black, into a CSV file. And then when we run our pipelines, we can patch all these applications that are running on specific major runtime versions, which is for Cloud Hub. It takes the latest as it comes in a date format. And RTF, we have an additional variable for patch version, which is the second image there. And that's our RTF pipeline, but we have two, one for Cloud Hub, one for RTF. And these patches have been issued several times for us. And after the first one, which required most of our C4E team to be involved, we've reduced that down to just one resource, one guy in the team going up, grabbing a CSV, and triggering a pipeline. So the takeaway here is that something that if you're doing it once for one of your platforms, it'll probably have to be something replicated in another platform that requires automation. So I'm sure that it'd be something you'd be working on again, that you wouldn't want to have to repeat the exact same scenario. And finally, that brings us to our last piece of management in your C4E teams that you can delve into when managing a hybrid platform. So this, of course, is how do you manage the utilization and allocation of licenses that you distribute out to project teams? So Cloud Hub, we all know, is very well governed. You can view allocation direct from the runtime manager, but say then you're now managing other platforms. You've got on-prem platforms. You might also be using RTF as well. And as I mentioned, our CI/CD pipeline integration slide for governing application licenses, including memory for infrastructure purposes. That's managed through those pipelines. But however, managing license allocation and consumption requires other methods. So BP have built process and experience APIs. Again, we're always following that same API-layered approach, and some scripts to ingest data to our Splunk platform for visualization purposes specific to license allocation across all our Mule options. So in that image there that you can see, again with dummy data, you can see I've split it into 3 sections. So you get your license summary at the top showing what you've purchased and what your entitlements are from MuleSoft against what spare you have today and spare you have from bursting, as that's some of the requirements for on-prem platforms. And below that, then you can have a look into a breakdown of each of your individual deployment platforms, which helps to track growth of your platforms. And finally, an on-prem tracker for compliance reasons to see where you peaked, or if there's any other areas that you can think that might require more governance. So we use this dashboard for our own management and alignment with MuleSoft, which became a necessity for managing resources in an org with hybrid deployment options. That's all I wanted to cover today to show. But the takeaway is that by combining out-of-the-box features with Runtime Fabric and the Cloud Hub offerings, with some custom innovations, you can really enhance your user experience to make MuleSoft an easy and smart choice for as a platform in your organization. So I do work with a great team who put a lot of effort into lots of these features, and I'm really just showing the tip of the iceberg on them. But thank you for listening to me today, and I hope that you take away something from this short presentation. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Timur. It was really great, knowing how BP has leveraged MuleSoft and different platforms in a hybrid infrastructure. And thanks for this session. I think there are a couple of interesting questions if you go to the Q&A channel, so you can answer those questions live.
So the first one there: how do you manage responsiveness at the gravity layer, e.g. health endpoint or endpoint, so cluster degraded status? So I've mentioned there that we have alerting already in place, that we get notified if there's any fault with our machines, that they will require some manual input. So someone will have to go in and diagnose, but we've also built up quite a vast knowledge repository that because I see what you're talking about there. That's quite common and comes up quite a lot, and what you need to do to rectify that. So as I mentioned, RTF is quite complex in the sense where you can show that error to someone and they'll probably not know what to do, but a lot of the time it's fixed by something very, very simple that maybe requires even some edge ingress points that might need restarted or rebooted, and you can actually delve into your Gravity services and see. And we've identified a lot of the times what those services that go into degraded status and how we can manage that without any downtime. So we've built a knowledge repository and we've published it online to our C4E team, that anyone can go in and pick it up without dependency on any really lead contacts of the platform. I hope that answered your question, Sean.
Yeah.
And then another question there, Sean, again, is how have you made your developers aware that certain technologies are not valid / available on RTF? So really our RTF platform, how we made our technologies not available. So we don't really support some legacy systems on RTF that might not be able to handle some OAuth authentication, which luckily for a lot of our use cases doesn't necessarily apply. By the time a project comes on, or developer, what platform they're going to use, we have a surgery in place where we'll dissect the entire use case of that project to make sure, okay, what platform they might be requesting to go on-prem, but RTF might not necessarily be the option for them due to whatever systems they're connecting to or their connectivity. or their use case.
This is mainly about something like, say, Object Store v2, where you say, okay, clearly on RTF you don't have file system access. So if you're trying to do persistence across workers using, something that would work on Cloud Hub or would work in an on-premise environment, will not work in the same fashion if you need longer persistence. As soon as you've rebooted your work or your app, then the OS2 values will just be gone. So this is about saying, okay, if you have a development team who are developing for multiple platforms, developing for, in parallel, sort of on-prem, classic Cloud Hub, and then RTF to say there's some things you may not do and will not work on RTS.
To be honest, we haven't really encountered much of that. Any use cases that haven't been supported.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry, I can't answer that for you.
Okay, that's fine.
Cool. We have 2 more questions. Yeah.
Okay. How often do you upgrade your runtime appliance version, runtime version, agent version? What is the average time taken to deploy an application to RTF? I'm sorry, we have seen this taken upwards of 20 minutes, depending on the dependencies/packages. What is your experience? How do you authenticate to on-prem SQL Server from RTF? Is the SQL authentication using username and password or Windows Auth/Kerberos? Okay, a lot of very good questions there that I'm sure is a big ask for a lot of people. How often do we upgrade our appliance version? So this really gets done, our appliance, as we were early adopters, I mentioned, we've had to update our appliance version quite often, especially within our first year. So I'll answer a few of these questions in one here that you're talking about the dependency of taking maybe 20 minutes to deploy an application. Well, when we were going through RTF and working out what the configurations and specs need to be for machines, we were really testing it against Cloud Hub to say, okay, when I'm deploying an application, it'll come up in maybe 5 minutes, depending on whatever vCore or CPU is being assigned to it. So really, I would argue that would come down to what infrastructure configuration that you've got set up. Do you have the right spec machines for CPU? Do they have correct IOPS settings? This information is public on MuleSoft, but was tricky at the time setting up RTF. So I would advise going in and making sure you've got the right spec. Our applications take about around 5 to 8 minutes at 0.1 vCore allocation for applications on Runtime Fabric to start up. However, that was not always the case. It was until we figured out the right spec for our machines that we were able to do that. How often do we upgrade our Runtime Fabric version? We're actually going through one at the minute, planning for it. And the reason for that is issues with the kernel that we're running. So you might be running different machines, but we use Red Hat. And with our Red Hat servers, there's been some bugs on them that MuleSoft have addressed and gravitational teams have addressed that do require you be on a specific version of your Red Hat and your kernel. So we're currently upgrading to that, which requires full infrastructure rehaul and recreation. So we're just going to be, we're making sure that we've tested that correctly in proof of concept clusters. We run through it once, test a couple applications, and then roll it out into scale into our bigger clusters. Well, there are questions in there. Average time to deploy. Depending on your budget. Right. Sorry, yes, go ahead.
Yep. So I think you had addressed this question, I suppose. So maybe we can move on to the next topic. So for any further questions, guys, you can just reach out to us, to the organizers directly, and we will get your questions answered. Okay. Thanks, Demir, for the interactive session, and really good to know, good to see how BP has leveraged MuleSoft. Thanks again.
Thanks, Matt.
Great. Could you give me the control, and then I could. Yes, thanks. So let me share my screen. So I hope you guys can see the screen. Right. So we have 20 more minutes where we'll be covering the interactive quiz round right now. And then we have a sneak peek towards the MuleSoft hackathon, which will be organized real soon. And then we wrap up this event. So starting off with the quiz. So guys, we need to just move on to menti.com and have this as the joining code. And in the meanwhile, I'll start off the quiz. Yes, I can see some joiners. Okay, 12, 13, 16. I'll start off when we have around 20. So people who want to look at the code, here is the code. Okay, so let's start off with the questions.
The joining code is on the chat window.
Yes, so it's available on the screen yet. So can you guys see my screen as well? Okay, so let's start off with the question. So this is the first one. So the faster you answer, the more points you get, and we'll be looking for the first 3 winners. So all the best to you guys. Okay. So let's see who are the leaders. I think Taylor Swift needs to give your actual name if you win. Okay, to the next question. Perfect. So let's go to the leaderboard again. Great. You still have 4 more questions. So you have 2 more questions. You have a chance to redeem yourself. So please try harder.
We have a maximum answer. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So here we are, the next question. This should be an easy one. Right. Which are the tools available to control inbound traffic and resource allocation in Runtime Fabric? Okay, cool. And now we still have, I guess, Ganesh, do we have one more question as a bonus question? Okay, so we still have a chance for you to redeem yourself. So here goes the last one. Cool. So these are the correct answers. And let's see who the leaders are. Great.
Awesome.
So I'm not sure who Jigsaw is. So if you could just, in the chat window, if you could, all the top three winners, Prashant, Rahul Mehta, and Jigsaw, could you please type down your email IDs so we can send you the vouchers? We'll reach out to you after the meetup. Great, thanks. Going to the next one. So we have a MuleSoft hackathon. This is the first ever virtual MuleSoft hackathon, which has been organized by MuleSoft, and it has started from 22nd of October. It's going to end on 29th of October. So you can, so Sakti, if you can just, copy these links and post it in the chat. So guys, feel free to register and participate. This is going to be a really great event. We have people participating from all over the world. Muleys and Mule enthusiasts, it would be a good opportunity to look at what APIs and MuleSoft is capable of. Okay, all the best to you, everyone. Now for the next steps, we have so please do share your experiences in LinkedIn or in social media, and you can tweet some pictures in hashtag MuleSoft Meetup. If you have any feedback, please do contact the organizers in the event page. You can directly, if you have any specific queries, you can address to us directly. The meetup recordings will be available in our YouTube channel, and we will also share a SlideShare link to the presentations that we had that has been presented by Demir and Andreas, and have those links available in the YouTube recording description as well. Okay. The next topics, we have some probable topics which people from our community has shown interest to present. So one of them is error handling and propagation for API-led, event-driven, and batch architectures. Azure DevOps with MuleSoft, and you still also have an opportunity to reach out to the organizers directly if you want to present something specific, and we'll give you that opportunity. So the next meetup is most probably going to be on the first week of December. We still haven't finalized the date yet, but please feel free to send us your topics if you want to present anything specific. Okay. Now for the feedback, guys, you just need to again go to menti.com. Just spare a few minutes for the feedback for how this session went. Did you like this session? And just one-liners for or one word describing this event. Okay. So I'll go to the link. Ganesh, would you be able to start off the feedback? Due to some reason, it's.
I think you have to go back. Just go back. Just share this. Let me share this screen.
Are you starting off?
Yeah.
Yes, please. So guys, you just need to have the joining code 6563101. Awesome, enriching, engaging, managed. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. So let's go for the next one. So it's basically for the topics for the next meetup that you would prefer to hear from us.
Any specific topic, guys, if you that you would want to be presented in the next meetup, or you'd like to speak about in the next meetups, please feel free to add. Okay, cool. So API governance, okay, definitely, yeah. More on RTF, OAuth, and JWT, okay. Cool, we'll just wait for 15 seconds more. Great, thanks, guys. Ganesh, you can stop sharing. So thanks everyone for joining this meetup. It was really great having a good audience and lots of good questions. Feel free to reach out to the organizers for anything that you need, and we will be sharing the YouTube link again through an email. So yeah, please feel free to give us feedback and interact with us as you can. Okay, thanks everyone again, and thank you for joining. Hope to see you guys again in the next meetup. Cheers.
Thanks all.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.